Hello everyone, I am Be Better Gamer. Welcome to Be Better Gamer Wrestling. This channel is dedicated to the Aki developed series of wrestling games from the N64 such as WCW NW Revenge, Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, and WWF No Mercy, which is the subject of today's video. And if you are joining me for the first time, you are in for a treat because this is the video I've been waiting to record since I pretty much started doing my WWF No Mercy Let's Plays. I said eventually one day I'm going to get to the Hardcore Championship and I'm going to do a Let's Play with Tazz. The man, the human wrecking machine, the human suplex machine, FTW champion, ECW World Heavyweight champion, TV title champion, tag team champion. He was the fourth and final ECW Triple Crown champion. If you asked me who my top 5 favorite wrestlers were circa 1999-2000, Tazz, you better believe Tazz was on that list. I was a huge fan of him in ECW, and I was super excited when he was coming to the WWE. I remember it like it was yesterday when he debuted at the Royal Rumble 2000 Royal Rumble at MSG against Kurt Angle. I was pumped. I have a lot of great stories about Tazz, about watching Tazz, that I'm going to get into with this episode. You know, if this is the first time you're watching my Let's Play, usually when I do these Let's Plays, yeah, I talk about the game and what I'm doing in the game, but I also like to talk about the historical context, you know, what was going on around the time No Mercy was being developed, around the time it was released. I'm just staring Matt Hardy down, apparently, just waiting. I probably got distracted and I didn't start playing right away. I recorded this gameplay a while ago, and a few things I do want to acknowledge. So this is my Hardcore Championship series, and I started my Hardcore Championship series with Mankind. So that was the last Let's Play I did, was with Mankind, Mick Foley, Cactus Jack, whatever you want to call them, but I used the Mankind character in this game. And I knew I wanted Mankind to be the first episode of my Let's Play series, but I hadn't unlocked his original Mankind attire, you know, his classic brown attire. And you have to get in the SmackDown Mall, and for some reason I didn't have enough money. So if you notice, when I started this Hardcore Championship path, it's clean, it's 0%. I'm starting with Tazz. Even though this is technically my second Let's Play, I actually recorded this gameplay before I did the Mankind gameplay because I needed to earn the money. By doing that, I messed up the championship paths. I didn't realize that until probably a day or two ago when I was going through my championship paths and noticing they were a little off. I was supposed to lose, you know, when you get to the part with the APA, you got to say yes or no. I said no with Mankind, and then I was supposed to lose the match after that, and I didn't. I won the match after that. I believe I beat Mark Henry and S.A. Rios, and I wasn't supposed to do that. So I'm kind of going to repeat the championship path in a way, because you say yes to APA with Tazz in this one, even though Tazz wouldn't back down for the APA. Alright, he ain't scared of nobody. He's from Red Hook. I do have to say yes to the APA and accept their services, but then I end up fighting Cactus Jack in the end. So yeah, if you notice I'm repeating against Cactus Jack, that's why. But also, before I get into a lot of other my favorite things about Tazz, because like I said, he was one of my favorite wrestlers at one point. There I am choking Matt Hardy. I'm gonna do my best to win a lot of these matches with the Tazz mission, one of the most powerful submission moves in this game. You know, Tazz, I was super excited about WWF No Mercy coming out, obviously because I was super excited about all the Aki developed wrestling games back in the day. You know, I've been playing them since World Tour, and then I played WCW NW Revenge, then WrestleMania 2000, then I imported Virtual Pro Wrestling 2, so needless to say, I was pumped about WWF No Mercy. And yeah, I was excited because you had the Radicals who were going to be in the game, you know, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn and Benoit, but they were all in Revenge. So I was like, oh, it's just cool, we're gonna have him back in the WWF. Tazz was like one of the characters that I knew was gonna be in the game, and I was like, finally I'm gonna be able to play as Tazz in a wrestling game. Because you gotta remember, Tazz was with ECW, right? So ECW had a really crappy wrestling game that came out at the beginning of 2000. It was bad, alright? Usually I don't like to say things are bad or not, because, you know, I like to respect what people have gone on their way to, you know, and worked hard on and put their blood, sweat, and tears. But come on, ECW Hardcore Revolution was a bad game. It was developed by Acclaim. Acclaim actually did a few other wrestling games. They did like Warzone and Attitude, I think the other one was called. Those were terrible also. Acclaim never made a good wrestling game in my opinion. And Tazz was in that game. I don't know if I bought it or rented it. I remember I played it and I was like, this is terrible. This is not how I want to play with Tommy Dreamer and Rob Van Dam and Tazz. So there was another WWF game called WWF Royal Rumble, which came out in August of 2000, and that was on the Dreamcast. And I played that also, and I played as Tazz in that game. I was like, oh my god, this game is not good either. When is No Mercy coming out? Because when I get No Mercy, the very first person I'm going to play as is Tazz. And sure enough, when I got No Mercy, Tazz was the very first wrestler I played as. Because like I said, if you ask me in 1999 to 2000 who one of my favorite wrestlers were at that time, Tazz. And, you know, No Mercy came out towards the end of 2000. And by that time, it was still in the period because, you know, he debuted at the Royal Rumble, so he debuted at the beginning of 2000. He still quite hadn't really done anything of note, but I was like, you know, let's give him a while, let's see what happens. And unfortunately that was not the case, so I'm gonna get into that. But I guess, you know, like I said, Tazz in this game, he is pretty much how he was in ECW. You know what I mean? Like his moveset, his character, like they gave him customized walks. He's got that customized Tazz walk. There's a lot of moves that are only specific to Tazz. Obviously the Tazz mission and the Tazzplex. He's got the capture suplex counter. He's got the that Tazz clothesline. That's what it's called. The Tazz, the big man's clothesline. You know, he's great to play. He's got that running T-bone. He's even got that that T-bone suplex that's a different animation because it's more like the T-bone Tazzplex, you know. So they like, it almost seemed like this game was kind of custom tailored to make sure Tazz was as awesome as he was gonna be, because maybe the developers thought like, oh shit, Tazz is gonna be this game, oh, we gotta make him the best character in this game. To me, Tazz is one of the most fun wrestlers to play in this game because he has so many suplexes, and it's always fun to suplex everyone. You know what I mean? I mean, just look at Brock Lesnar now, Suplex City. Everyone's losing their mind just because he does all these German suplexes. Like, Tazz did all the suplexes, okay? He didn't just do German suplexes. Tazz was giving you the Dragon Suplex, Tiger Suplex, Germans, T-bones, Capture Suplex, Side Suplexes. I mean, you name it. And they weren't just suplexes, all right? They were Tazzplexes. We're talking the Northern Lights Tazzplex, the German Tazzplex, Fisherman Tazzplex, you know, belly to belly Tazzplex. Oh my god, as Joey Styles would do. That was my really bad Joey Styles impression, by the way. But ECW, so I started watching ECW around I'm gonna say 96. I'm gonna say 96, maybe 97. It's really fuzzy when I started watching ECW because I started watching ECW through tapes, VHS tapes. All right, this is pre-YouTube. This is pre-DVDs, alright, when you had to go out to Queens to some section of the mall where some guy was selling tapes at a little kiosk for $20 a pop, and half of the footage on it was recorded from handheld cameras, okay? The dark days of tape trading, I like to call it. You know, wrestling fans today, we're blessed with the WWE Network, New Japan World, YouTube, all these things. But that's how I discovered ECW, because I would read about it in magazines. I would hear about these wrestlers like Sabu, Tazz, Rob Van Dam, and this promotion ECW. And even on that Monday Night Raw where you saw those ECW wrestlers show up, I was like, what's going on? Who are these people? So I started getting into watching ECW, you know, events that were recorded and put onto VHS and distributed and sold, and eventually I would go watch some ECW events live. But Tazz was one of the wrestlers that stood out to me the most because he was from Brooklyn. Okay, I was from Brooklyn. I lived in Brooklyn at the time. I'm not in Brooklyn anymore, but I was for, you know, pretty much until I was 22 is until I moved. You know, he was from Brooklyn. He wasn't a big guy. He was 5'9", but he walked around like he was freaking Goldberg. You know what I mean? He walked around like he was the Ultimate Warrior. Like, no one could touch him. okay, because he was badass. And the thing I think that separated Tazz for me from everyone else was like, okay, he was a small guy, and I was into a lot of the smaller guys who were, you know, like the Rey Mysterios and the Jerichos, the high flyers, you know, a lot of the Japanese guys, Jushin Thunder Liger, Otani, and stuff like that. And Tazz was this small guy who was this powerhouse, and I hadn't really seen someone like that. You know what I mean? I hadn't really seen someone who was obviously not as big as everyone else, but he's throwing everyone else around like he's a one-man Steiner machine. You know what I mean? Like he's just completely dominating everyone, choking people out with the Tazz mission. And I was just completely, my imagination was just, you know, captivated by Tazz. And not only that, he wasn't, you know, he was tough. You know, he cursed a lot. He talked trash. You know, that's that Brooklyn in him. You know, I'll fight you here. I'll fight you anywhere. You know, always cutting his promos, always talking shit. Loved it so much. But he also like wrestled. You know what I mean? He trained in judo. He was one of the first wrestlers, really, in my eyes. You know, he wasn't the first, but at least to me, he was one of the first wrestlers to really adapt that UFC kind of fighting style. He can grapple you, he can throw you to the ground. You know, he's brawling with Sabu 1 minute, and then he's doing all these like judo throws and leg lock submissions and, you know, all these crazy different things that not a lot of wrestlers combined. You didn't see a powerhouse, you know, throwing all these submission moves. You didn't see a powerhouse, you know, doing all these throws and flips, you know, big clothesline, you know, gorilla press, all the, like, you know, he was suplexing people in such unique ways. He wasn't just, you know, he couldn't really lift guys over his head. I mean, I'm pretty sure he could probably lift a few guys, but that wasn't his style. So that's what really captivated me about Tazz, and I was hooked, man. I was hooked. You know, everyone loved RVD, Tommy Dreamer, Raven, Sandman, but Tazz was my #1 in ECW. He really was. Up until the time he left, from when I started watching ECW, Tazz was my #1. And, you know, when I got this game, I was so excited to finally play as Tazz and to, you know, relive all his glory. The first people I started creating in this game were other ECW wrestlers, so I could have them fight Tazz, you know. And even in Virtual Pro Wrestling 2 at the time, I had made a Tazz call. But Tazz, you know, in ECW, he did a lot. He was one of the main, you know, faces of ECW in the beginning. Like I said, he was a tag team champion. He was a TV title champion. You know, his TV title reign is the 3rd longest individual reign at 261 days behind RVD and Shane Douglas. Obviously, RVD #1. He had the 700-day reign. His world heavyweight, he won the world heavyweight championship twice, and his first reign, he held it for 252 days, so almost as long as his TV title. And then he would, that was also the 3rd longest individual reign for world heavyweight championship, behind Shane Douglas's 4th and 2nd reign. So, you know, technically you say Shane Douglas and Tazz held the world heavyweight title the most. Tazz actually beat Shane Douglas for both the TV title and the world heavyweight title. The TV title is a little tricky because he won the TV title and held it for like less than a day at one point, but that's when he was a Tazmaniac, I believe. But his actual legit like TV championship run, he beat Shane Douglas for that. And then when he made his world heavyweight championship run, he beat Shane Douglas for that as well. So kind of interesting that storyline there. They had a great feud with Shane Douglas and Tazz and Sabu. I mean, going back to 1996, you know, November to Remember 1996 was a moment that always stood out to me in wrestling, period, in all of wrestling, because, you know, there's great matches and then there's great moments. You know what I mean? Like Mick Foley getting thrown off the Hell in a Cell, that's a great moment. You know, the actual match itself, not really a great match because it's just Undertaker throwing Mick Foley around all the, you know, the whole time. You know, Shawn Michaels and Mankind, that's a great match that they had at In Your House. You know, but so I like to divide when I think back of wrestling. You know, I separate them between moments and matches. Sometimes you know, you can have a great moment within a great match, or a great match can spur from a great moment. But one of the greatest moments I remember witnessing, not in person again, this was on some VHS that had a really low quality on it for some reason. I remember I had to turn the volume all the way up, and it was November to Remember 96, and Tazz had been calling out Sabu for like a year, okay, because Tazz had broke his neck. He came back, and when he came back, he was calling out Sabu because there was this whole angle about Tazz and Sabu were supposed to be involved with the triple threat, and apparently this really happened behind the scenes where Sabu cut out. He went to Japan. He took a gig in Japan and ditched the triple threat event. So Tazz was mad about that, and, you know, and apparently Paul Heyman was, and they fired Sabu on the spot, you know, in front of everyone, and they told everyone, yeah, he decided to go to Japan. So there was a lot of heat between Tazz and Sabu, and then Tazz got injured, and then when he came back, he was calling out Sabu for a match, and Sabu didn't want to face him. Such was the story. There's a lot more other political back stuff, you know, whether what was real, what was not real, I don't know. I wasn't there. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to talk about the story and how it affected me. So here you got this guy Tazz. He's mad at Sabu, and for a whole year he's calling him out, and Tazz is just being destructive. He is, everyone he sees, he takes his anger out on. He beats them up in the ring. He beats them out. He cuts these scathing promos about Sabu and Paul Heyman and F everyone. He doesn't need anyone. You know, all he wants is to get his hands on Sabu and teach him something, to give him payback for what he did, because what he did wasn't right. So it all comes to a head at November to Remember, because November to Remember, Sabu and RVD were involved in a triple threat. Well, they were involved in a tag team match that turned into a triple threat, because that's what ECW did. They would always start off, yeah, these two guys are fighting, now everyone's fighting. And Tazz came out during that, and he tried to attack Sabu, but ended up choking out RVD, and that caused Sabu and RVD to lose that match. And so Tazz would come back out later demanding that he fight Sabu, and they were already, I believe, booked for a match at the ECW pay-per-view, the Barely Legal pay-per-view, the first pay-per-view. And that was going to happen in the beginning of 1997, like in the spring of 97, and Tazz couldn't wait. He's like, I want Sabu out now. I don't care. No one's going to tell. And then the ring announcer was like, Tazz, you got to leave. We're going to start a match. Like, screw you. And he's like choking him out. He's got Bill Alfonso there on the whistle. And Todd Gordon comes out. He gets choked out. Paul Heyman comes out. Paul Heyman gets choked out. Like, Tazz is just... And then the lights go off. And everyone starts losing their mind. And you could hear the fans screaming. You could see some fans trying to light lighters so they could see what's going on. And Joey Styles is like, someone's in the ring with Tazz. And then the lights come up, and Sabu is pointing up. He's doing his Sabu point. And Tazz is standing in the corner, his arms folded. Like... It stood out to me so much because, you know, it wasn't... Usually when lights go off, you know, usually someone's behind someone, you know what I mean? Or, like, you know, someone gets spooked or scared, or they're still looking direction. Like, let's say if Tazz was looking outside of the ring when the lights go off, he'd still be in the same spot. And that's not how this went down. The lights went up, and you had this tableau of Sabu pointing up and Tazz looking at him, and the crowd losing their mind. Tazz and Sabu are just standing still posing, and the crowd is losing their mind. It was one of the greatest things I had ever seen. This was 1996, so we're talking about like 20 years ago, man. I was like 10, right? Does that math add up? Yeah, about 11 maybe. I was 11. No, I was 1986. Yeah, I was 10. I was watching this on VHS, and I was like, this is nuts. I had never, you know, I had watched WrestleManias, and I had watched SummerSlams. I remember Bret Hart and British Bulldog when I was a kid. That match really stood out to me because of the audience and how crazy they were acting when British Bulldog beat Bret Hart at SummerSlam for the IC title. But for some reason, that moment where Tazz and Sabu were in that ring, and for a few seconds they were pausing, staring at each other. You know, the lights had just come up. It just hit me like boom. Oh, I love this ECW. I love this Tazz. You know what I mean? And then they go to fight, and then the lights cut out, and then they come back up, and everyone's gone. And it was just brilliant. It was just brilliant, and the fans like chanting ECW, 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 and that was like one of my first, you know, moments where I was like, oh, this is wrestling, this is storytelling, you know what I mean? And then they would have their match at Barely Legal, Tazz and Sabu, and you know, and that rivalry continued on. It was just, you know, it's a legendary rivalry in ECW, but that's what, like, you know, that's when I got hooked, I think, on ECW, because say what you will about ECW, yeah, you had the violence and the blood and the guts and the sex and all that stuff, but ECW had great wrestlers, they had great wrestling, and they knew how to tell a story. They knew how to tell a story within the confines of a wrestling world, because something as simple as that, as turning off the lights and the lights turning back on, and these two wrestlers are posing now. This is the moment we've been waiting for. You know what I mean? We've been waiting for them to get in the ring together, face to face. And Tazz had been calling out all this time. No response from Sabu. It was just great stuff. And I resonated with Tazz's promos. I was a little kid. You know, I had no muscle on me. So I really gravitated towards Tazz, because Tazz, you know, he talked and he walked like he was the biggest guy in the room, but he could back it up. And that's what I always wished I wanted when I was a kid. I wished I could back it up, you know, and get into fights with the biggest kid in the room and kick his ass and everyone be afraid of me. You know, we all want that when we're the little kids. At least I wanted that. And I was a talker when I was a kid. I'm not proud of it, because I said a lot of nasty things to a lot of people who didn't deserve it. But you know, I ran my mouth. I was from Brooklyn. I was a kid. You know, I talk shit, and you know, I envisioned myself as Tazz. I just did my best not to get into fights with anyone, or as much as I could not get into fights. But you know, because some were unavoidable because of my mouth. But you know, I knew in the back of my mind, I'm not Tazz, so I better watch out here. But you know, he that's what I gravitated to, man. And whether or not you liked it, he was gonna get his way. So you know, he's dominant. So then he becomes the TV title champion, has a great feud with Bam Bam Bigelow, where they go through the ring, where they go through the what was that, the walkway, if you will, the ramp. You know, sort of like how they have the Tokyo Dome ramp. ECW had this ramp, and they went through that as well. I built a ramp. I used to have these action figures I used to play with a ring. So me and my friend, we built the ramp with 2 shoeboxes, and I emulated that a little bit. Man, I was so, you know, a lot of ECW just really hooked me. You know, and Tazz, I was always just, it always came back to Tazz. It always came back to Tazz. So when I found out that he was going to the WWF, I was super excited. Now, you gotta remember, this is, what, 2000, you know, that he's going into the WWF. So this is 16 years ago. So my perception of wrestling was a lot different than it is now. I thought Tazz was going to go to the WWF and be exactly like Tazz was in the ECW. And obviously that was not the case. And there's a lot of things surrounding that. But I just remember... I remember watching Tazz's last match in ECW. Well, not his last match, but the last match where he was the world champion. He took on Mike Awesome and Masato Tanaka in a triple threat, and he got pinned first. And we all knew he was leaving. You know, if you watched wrestling, and even at that time, it was the early days of the internet, but even at that time, you know, spoilers were getting leaked out, rumors, Tazz is going to WWF, blah, blah, blah. So you would watch it and like, oh, is that true? Is that really going to happen? And he's wrestling, and people are chanting, you sold out, you sold out. And he's like, you know, yeah, screw you, I did sell out, you know, screw you guys, you know. He's playing it up. He's playing it up. But you know, when he lost, and I was like, oh, he really is leaving. This is nuts. This is crazy. And Tazz, as you can see in his entrance video, that promo, they were like building that up, sort of like how they did Y2J. They were building it up, the 13 and the symbol, and he didn't know who it was, but I mean, we all knew who it was. And Royal Rumble, Madison Square Garden, hometown, New York. You know, I wish I got tickets for Madison Square Garden, but I didn't. So I watched it on pay-per-view. And right away, first match, Kurt Angle comes out. Kurt Angle at this time, he's undefeated. You know, I talked about it in my Let's Play with Kurt Angle. Had the best rookie year of all time in wrestling, hands down. And they start playing the, you know, the 13, the beep, 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 you know, the flat line, and the music starts playing, and Tazz comes out, and MSG is erupting. You know, there's Tazz signs, crazy stuff. And I was like, I couldn't believe it. Here's Tazz. For me, Tazz was like the first major star from ECW to go to, because he was like the singles competitor. Like, you had the Dudley Boys, yeah, and the Dudley Boys were already in the WWE by that time, but Tazz was like the first major singles star to show up into WWF. And I was like, oh, he's gonna beat up Triple H, he's gonna beat up The Rock, he's gonna beat up Austin. And that never happened. You know, and we didn't know that. None of us knew that watching that. Tazz himself didn't know that. Tazz, he runs a radio show now, and he's talked about it on his show, what that night was like. And it was very interesting to hear his side of the story, because he says going out beforehand, he was very excited, very, you know, hometown. He was like, oh, I can't believe this. And everyone was giving him a very nice, warm response backstage. He felt very comfortable going out, leaving the curtain. When he came back after the match was over, everything changed. Like, instantly, you know, he wasn't greeted by anyone. You know, oh, hey, nice job, you did this, did that. And he just felt like immediately after that, and I think he even told us a story about he kind of got, like, you know, talked to a little bit about that match, because they felt like he might have been too rough with Kurt Angle, even though it didn't look like he was doing anything different than what he did in ECW. And it's like, isn't this what you brought him here for? But whatever. Again, I wasn't there. I wasn't privy to all this information. You know, just hearing Tazz's side of the story was very telling for me, because in my mind it confirmed so many years later what I had always thought, was that Tazz didn't succeed in WWE the way he had in ECW, because it was a totally different environment. And I didn't really, you know, accept that when I was younger. When I was younger, I thought all of wrestling is the same, you know what I mean? WCW, ECW, WWE, no matter where you go, Japan, you should be allowed to be your best. You know, I would read about the backstage stuff, I would read about the politicking and this and that and all the rumors. And I guess I was still gullible enough to believe, like, no, that's not how it really is. They're all really just friends, and people aren't trying to hold people back and this and that. And there were some truths to that, unfortunately. And I like to believe, maybe I'm still being gullible, but I like to believe that some of that has died down. That we still hold on to the perception that people are being held back because of this, of that. I don't think that's really necessarily the case anymore. I just think the product itself has changed. And I'm talking specifically WWE here, obviously, because other companies are excluded from this kind of talk. But WWF back then was a highly competitive environment. The Monday Night Wars were a lot more competitive than we probably realized. And a lot of people's careers didn't take off the way they probably should have, or the way they were going before they went to WWF. I think out of all the acquisitions you look at from the Monday Night Wars area, and I would count all the people that came over from ECW before ECW folded and before WCW was bought. So if you look at all those people who came in, no one was as successful outside of WWE than Tazz was, except of course maybe Kurt Angle, because he won a gold medal. But I'm talking about in like professional wrestling, you know, Tazz was probably the most successful. You know what I mean? Jericho, he had good success in WCW, but he only got so far. You know, Eddie, Dean, and Benoit. I mean, Benoit, he won that world championship right at the tail end, but you gotta see they were kind of getting desperate because they knew they were gonna lose him. The Dudley Boys, you know, tag team champions, yeah, they were great, but I think in my mind, Tazz probably had the biggest mind share of being the biggest non-WWE star at the time. You know what I mean? And at least to me, again, I'm super biased because I love Tazz. And to see him after that match, you know, within a few months, he's not really doing anything. He's fighting for the Hardcore Championship, which is why I'm doing the Hardcore Championship path with him. He did win it 3 times, but every time he won it, I mean, he won at the WrestleMania Battle Royal twice, you know, and that was the WrestleMania Battle Royal. It was what it was. And he won it some other time from Crash Holly, but held it for like a few seconds. It's like, if that was me, it's like, yo, Tazz, just give Tazz the title and let him destroy everyone. Instead, they give it a Crash Holly and they do this whole 24/7 and they make the Hardcore Championship a joke. And then you got Taz in there. It's like, Taz shouldn't be losing to guys like Crash Holly. Taz shouldn't be losing to guys like Steve Blackman. Like you know, even if it is hardcore matches, he shouldn't be losing to these guys. I was like, what's going on? It was so weird to see Taz lose. You know, and then you had that incident where, alright, so Taz was in WWF. This was right after WrestleMania. And Mike Awesome was the ECW World Heavyweight Champion. You know, he won it in that triple threat, lost it to Masato Tanaka for 6 days, and then won it back. And then he signed with WCW. So Heyman and ECW, they were very upset about that because he shows up on WCW TV while he's the ECW champion. So they do this thing where Taz is contacted by Heyman to come in to ECW, beat Mike Awesome for the World Heavyweight Championship while he's still contracted to WWF and while Mike Awesome is contracted to WCW. Insane. Unheard of. It was the first and only time, and you know, it only will be unless like you have someone from New Japan defend their IWGP Heavyweight Championship on a WWF program, but that's not going to happen. Well, never say never really in this business, but you know, Taz beat Mike Awesome for the ECW World Heavyweight Championship, and he comes and he shows up on Raw, he shows up on SmackDown with the title. And I was like, what's going on? This is nuts. This is crazy. This is before anyone had the foresight to see that, oh, WCW is going to be bought in a year or so. ECW is going to fold in a year or so. You know what I mean? So, and I was like, oh, here we go. Taz, World Heavyweight Champion from ECW. He's in WWE. Oh, now he's going to really tear it up. And no, what happens? He gets beat by Triple H in a match. Not only does he get beat by Triple H, but Tommy Dreamer comes out to help Taz, and Tommy Dreamer gets beat up by Triple H, which is understandable. I mean, that's Tommy Dreamer's thing, you know. He was the underdog. He was always getting beat up. I mean, he ends up beating Taz for the title and then losing it to Just Incredible right after that. So, like, you know, that's his story, the never-ending story of Tommy Dreamer. But I was surprised, to say the least. And then he started commentating, and he retired in like 2002, and I was like, what? Taz is retiring to be a commentator? And you know, I read about the injuries and I read about how he felt, and I was like, you know, again, I was too young to really to be at a place where I am now, where I can say, you know, Taz becoming a commentator, that was probably the best decision he ever made in his life. You know what I mean? He set himself up for the future. He managed to set himself up for family. He's, you know, doing fine now. He's doing just fine. You know, did he really need to be World Heavyweight Champion? No, because he's living a great life. That's me now. But as back then, you know, young wrestling fan me, I was pissed. I was like, no, Taz deserves every right to be World Heavyweight Champion. But, you know, it was a different time, if you really think about it. And, you know, hindsight is 20/20. And again, there was a lot of other factors that kept Taz back. You know, and it's easy to pretend like they weren't there, but come on, they were there. So maybe at the end of the day, Taz didn't have everything in, you know, helping him to succeed in WWE, but Taz's character, and even in the Attitude Era, Taz definitely couldn't say half the stuff he said in ECW, okay? Because he couldn't drop his F-bombs, he couldn't talk trash, he couldn't, you know, Taz broke the fourth wall down way sooner than WWE ever did. I mean, they were doing promos with Taz, calling out Paul Heyman and talking about all these backstage stuff. Like, Taz was Stone Cold Steve Austin before Stone Cold Steve Austin was, you know, in comparison to, like, his feud with Vince McMahon. That's who Taz was in ECW, fighting the system, creating the FTW title because he felt like he wasn't getting his shot and this and that. So he was very much against the system, and when he comes to WWF, well, he can't do that shtick because that shtick has already been done by Austin. That shtick, you know, he's not going to really do that to the quote-unquote Steph McMahon-Helmsley era because that's Stephanie McMahon. She's the daughter of Vince McMahon. So completely different environment that Taz's character probably wasn't able to thrive in. But also, WWE at that time still wasn't ready to embrace a smaller guy throwing around all their big guys. I mean, it would be several years later, even though he came in around the same time as Guerrero and Benoit, you know, it wouldn't be until several years later that those guys were winning the World Heavyweight Championship. You know, and even now to this day, it's, you know, it's still hard for guys of Tazz's size to be taken as someone who could be like a powerhouse and throwing around, you know, like Brock Lesnar. But if Tazz was allowed to be Tazz, if WWE was able, I really think the only way that Tazz was going to be able to survive in the WWE product at that time is if WWE changed completely to fit Tazz's style. But of course that wasn't going to happen. And when you're a wrestling fan, when you're a teenage wrestling fan, you're pissed off as the world like Tazz is. But then when you get older and you look back at it, it's like, it's not so bad. But, you know, because he's doing fine, so why should I be upset for him if he's not that upset? I mean, you know, the most we can walk away from is that, like, you know, Tazz, he gave me a lot of great memories when he did wrestle. I always loved his matches, and I always will love his matches and who he was and those moments, you know? That's what you got to focus on. You got to focus on their successes and their achievements and what made you happy, and then you pop in WWF No Mercy and you throw everyone around and you make everyone submit to the Tazz mission. So that's my Let's Play. Very, you know, I have so much more. I didn't even get to talk about some other things about Tazz, but you know what? Maybe I'll save it for another Let's Play. But I hope you enjoyed this one. Very excited that I got to finally talk to Tazz, talk about Tazz, and yeah. Until next time, you know, I'm continuing this hardcore championship. You know what to do. It's YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Until next time, I am Be Better Gamer, and as always, don't just watch WWE. Keep watching all the wrestling. Thank you.